The more I look at Auburn's 2023 signing class, the more I love it.
Freezing temperatures are likely for several hours inland and a few hours closer to the coast.
Yes.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. We're talking recruiting with John Garcia, as we do every few weeks. And I want to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football and college basketball recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network. John, the more I look at some of these kids that are doing all these all-star games, the more pumped I get about what Hugh Freeze and his staff have been able to do in the first few weeks of him manning the post as the head coach, specifically with the guys in this All-American game. When you look at Keldric Faulk, you look at Darren Reed, you look at Kayin Lee, and we'll start with Keldrick Faulk. And what he's done as far as a football player is obviously impressive. That's just what's going to happen whenever he lines up and puts pads on. But weighing in at 270, you and I were talking briefly before we clicked record. I mean, just his ability and what he's been able to do in the weight room and growing as a player. You've seen it for the last 4 years or so, John.
Yeah, Zach, met Keldrick as a freshman at Highland Home, long, lean, string bean type of player who you just knew, man, if this thing all comes together, this could be a one-man wrecking crew. And my goodness, I think in the last 12 months in particular, basketball aside, because I think that kept the weight down a little bit.
Sure.
Keldrick has made huge gains physically, and now he looks like he's already playing college ball in the SEC at 6'5", 6'6", 270 pounds. I was surprised by that number, just like you might have been when I saw it coming out of San Antonio this week. But then you look at him, and he's so tall and long that it's got to go somewhere, right? So this frame is really interesting. He lives on the edge. That's where he's most comfortable. That's where he's played his whole career, working outside in. Heck, he was even a wide receiver at times at Highland Home, but now he keeps getting bigger. So you're like, how much inside work can Keldrick maybe start to add to the repertoire? But the length and the physicality that he now brings at 270 has just been tough for offensive linemen to deal with, whether he is on the edge using that speed and big time first step or working inside. I saw a push-pull move that kind of went semi-viral the other day.
Yeah.
He's working a spin move inside, so he's too quick for interior blockers and still just too darn long and strong for exterior blockers. So this is really rounding into not only maybe the best Auburn signee of this cycle, but as critical a signee as Auburn has had over the last couple of years. When you factor in, it was a flip from Florida State. He's a local kid. And he plays the edge, which has really been the position that you've taught me has been the biggest Auburn need for quite some time.
Right. Another tweet that kind of went semi-viral, to use your verbiage, Darren Reed creating a lot of penetration down there in a few videos that I've seen shared from some of those practices. And to me, it kind of happened earlier in the process. So I think his signing or his commitment that turned into a signing kind of got lost a little bit, John. But this is a really, really good player that's going to play early.
Similar to Keldrick, where he, when you first see him, another 4-year high school starter at a good program, Carver Columbus, one of the best in the state of Georgia. You saw him early, you're like, oh, this is a long, lean edge rusher. But then now as a senior, you're like, wait, he's also 270. So he's another one who can work outside in or inside out, depending on how that projection goes. And so you theoretically line him up next to Keldrick Faulk one way or the other. And now all of a sudden you're talking about a heck of a 1-2 punch from a modern perspective, because nowadays it's those hybrid guys that really put stress on opposing offensive lines, guys that are comfortable working outside, but now have the frame to play inside. And Reed is another one who fits that bill. The difference is he has more experience working inside. So he's already comfortable, in full gear, consistently working on the inside as to where Faulk is a little bit more of a work on progress in that regard, even though he probably has a little bit more juice and twitch to his game. So the floor of Reed, the ceiling of Faulk combined with that hybrid and tweener size is going to be really advantageous for Auburn early on. Like you said, it's hard to imagine this combination, not finding the field in some capacity, regardless of how the returning group and the portal additions look up front. Just too much talent to keep on the bench, frankly, especially when you're talking about a transition roster and coaching staff heading into year one.
I'm curious to see what they're going to use Reed for. I'm assuming it's a 3 technique and interior defensive lineman, but not the nose tackle, right? That's kind of what I'm expecting.
Yeah,
to do that,
he's still a little lean for that. Yeah,
he probably needs 15 or 20 pounds, right? I mean, you look at like Marcus Harris and kind of how they're going to use him this year. He's 293 based on last year's roster. I just looked it up for confirmation there. But is that what you kind of expect them to do with Reed, or do you think maybe he'll stick a defensive end and kind of stay where he's at?
He's got the frame to add a little bit more. I think that's really important here. Not as tall as Keldrick, but 6'4" or so. For Reed. So he still looks long, right? So I think that provides a little bit more room to fill out. Heck, Marcus Harris in high school was a linebacker, right? So we know these transformations are possible to be able to add weight and utilize your strengths on the interior. So I think long-term, that's probably where you would expect Reed to end up, as opposed to Faulk, where I think you kind of stay in this hybrid middle of nowhere trajectory physically so that you maintain some of that versatility, because his length, his athleticism kind of stands alone among these Auburn signees. So I think you'd rather him stay a little bit leaner, and with Reed, you kind of let it happen as it happens, right? So initially you're more of an inside out guy, but then as you add that weight, you stay more permanently on the interior. So I think that's where we should expect him to develop.
Kayin Lee had a pass deflection, a pass breakup that happened on the sideline, and some drills that a lot of people kind of videoed. You saw like the same play from like 4 different angles. Everybody was videoing it and then tweeted it out, which is kind of fun to see. But he used his, he kind of got beat and then used his closing speed to make up for it, which you could do at the college level. You can't do it at the NFL level. But what do you like about Kayin Lee, the athlete, right? I mean, we've talked about him as the prospect, but as far as what he's going to be able to do to give him an advantage against other players, specifically opposing wide receivers, John, what do you like about that?
Yeah, I love what he does at the catch point. I think, you could get lost in the route a little bit there, but when he arrives and the ball arrives, the timing, the instincts, the ball skills, the physicality is all there at that moment. Had a couple of pass breakups that I saw, but really the speed is what you take away from it. It's that ability to hit the gas when you need him to. So I think coupled with his size and experience all over the secondary, I'm starting to think a little bit more nickel the more I see Kayin Lee. And that's so important in this day and age, Zach. I mean, think of the offenses that Auburn is going to face week in, week out, whether you're talking Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Alabama, you're going to face a lot of 3-4 receiver sets. So you need that nickel back who not only can aid in the run defense and help set the edge, but a guy who can be comfortable laterally with a two-way go with enough makeup speed and playmaking ability to work underneath or as a trail defender. And that's something that Lee showed plenty of on that rep. And we've seen a lot of him showing examples there at Cedar Grove of that type of playmaking ability, working all over the secondary there. So I think he could still wind up as an exterior corner, but the more I see of his athleticism, lateral ability, and pure explosiveness, I'm starting to think a little bit more nickel could be his best fit, especially given the depth we see that Auburn has at the corner position. I think that could be a natural spot for Kayin, at least early in his Tiger career.
John, I'm getting asked over and over and over again, both in person, both through text messages, YouTube comments. Should I be concerned that Jeremiah Cobb did not sign during the early signing period? I want to get your thoughts on that in just a moment. Right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Bet Online. Bet Online is the best place in the world to wager on all of your sports action. They've got a ton of different props, odds, and lines, more than anyone else, so they say. So be sure to check that out. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. John Garcia, our guest, talking all things Cruton. John, some Auburn fans concerned that Jeremiah Cobb, the star running back, most Auburn fans' favorite player in this class, didn't sign with Auburn, at least officially. Should there be any kind of concern amongst the Auburn fan base for this?
Look, now it's 2023, right? So when we talk about recruiting in this day and age, until things are officially official in every sense of the word, you are worried to a degree, just because of the natural fluidity of the process, right? I mean, other schools calling, NIL, all this stuff. But when you think of Jeremiah Cobb, first of all, he has never budged from this Auburn commitment publicly, right? Through a coaching transition, obviously the maintenance of Cadillac Williams was really critical in that. But then you start to look at it from an analytical perspective. You zoom out and you go, okay, if he moves on from Auburn, who are the two schools that are in the mix? We've always talked about Clemson and Georgia for Jeremiah Cobb. Well, both of those schools scrambled a little bit late in the cycle and ended up signing multiple running backs each. So from a numbers perspective, the biggest theoretical threats to Auburn, both galvanized and kind of spearheaded late running back recruiting wins. Georgia flipped 2 running backs, one from UCLA, one from NC State, and Clemson picked up a couple under the radar types, including the kid from Handley High School in Alabama. So both of them hitting multiple running backs and getting each of them signed, I think, was another indicator that Jeremiah Cobb and that flip attempt was not as successful on their end, to the point where they were going to be comfortable signing a couple of backs. So I think that, combined with the fact that Cobb has always said, hey, I'm signing with my teammates in February. That's just what we're doing at Montgomery Catholic, and that's kind of it. I think all of that bodes very well for Auburn to maintain this commitment and win his signature here in about 3 weeks or so. So I think unless another school emerges, Deion Sanders calls him, something outside the box, I think it's pretty secure for Auburn, because this was always the plan for Cobb to sign in February. And the other schools that you have your head on a swivel about satisfied their needs in multiple ways in that regard. So I think
I didn't realize that. That's huge, because it's kind of always been Clemson, like Clemson.
Yes.
But it's clear he's been made a priority. Like the first pictures of Hugh Freeze as an Auburn coach kind of out in the wild was him eating breakfast with Jeremiah Cobb and Carnell Williams. So that's definitely a good sign. As far as guys being able to play early at Auburn in this class, possibly being either a starter or a contributor in the rotation in 2023, who are some of the guys that you like?
Well, let's go right back to Cobb, right? I mean, when you think of making that transition from high school to college, first you're like, okay, what's the size, right? What is the frame we're working with here? Because you can't be one that you're like, hey, you got to go add 30 pounds before you can see the field. No worries there with Jeremiah Cobb. He's profiled well since his sophomore year, 5'11", 6 foot, 190 pounds or so, all the production you could want at the position, and a need, right? It's a need area from a depth perspective there. So I do think he has the ability to make that transition and see the field early, and running back is one of those spots. I mean, look at Tank and Hunter. Running back is one of those spots where, as a true freshman, you can work yourself in kind of gradually, right? Hey, this is your responsibility on this play, go run it, and then come right back out, right? So you can build kind of slowly at the running back position. And then I think otherwise, you look at some situational players, right? Guys who maybe can factor into a rotation. And I think we talked about them at the top of the show. It's those pass rushers, particularly Faulk. I think when we see a kid so often, and again, we've seen him for 4 years, we kind of overscout and we tend to look too much into it and say, well, he's going to need to put on this weight. He's so raw. He does so many things for Highland Home that he hasn't really focused on pass rushing. So where is the technical progress? And then you watch him at the All-American Bowl, and you're like, oh, there's plenty of technique. He's using his hands incredibly well. He's maximizing that great wingspan and length that he has. And, oh, by the way, he's 270 and can work as an outside-in pass rusher. So I think that's another player where you look at and say it's going to be tough to imagine going through the 23 season and not seeing Faulk on the field in some capacity. So those are the two that I begin with. And then obviously, look, it's a total overhaul in the offensive line. So any one of those guys, I'd probably go Tyler Johnson first, just from a size perspective as a freshman. But, the portal's still going to giveth towards Auburn here up front. The line on both sides of the ball has clearly been a priority for Freeze and this coaching staff through the portal. So I do think that's an area where you'll continue to see some progress, and that could potentially bump out some of these freshmen.
I haven't asked you about this guy since we got him on the early signing day, but the baby goat is what we're calling him. Hank Brown, this quarterback from Lipscomb. Do you know anything about this kid other than he's a baby goat?
Well, first of all, it's a great name. I think when you bring over somebody that you had committed to your last school, right? Liberty commit at one point, it brings a different level of continuity and comfort. And you're talking about a Hugh Freeze quarterback. So what do you expect? High processing ability. The arm is there, the size is there, all that stuff. Yes. I think that's easy to see, but it's really the processing. You think of what Hugh covets at the position, you've got to be able to make those decisions quick. If you're running that RPO, read the edge, read the backer, and go, right? And now you add the fact that he was at Lipscomb, right, with Trent Dilfer, which has really upped its passing regiment since Dilfer took over there. Now he's, of course, at UAB, and it makes you feel even better about that processing ability, because that high school offense is not your typical high school offense. There's a lot of depth and processing needed to trigger that thing. And the last few years have been really efficient on top of it from Brown's perspective at quarterbacking. So I think the processing and decision-making there is really critical and a great get there in that regard for Auburn. And obviously continuity-wise, Freeze knows what he's getting in that regard. Now, the portal will still be a big deal at quarterback and all of those things, but you need depth, you need bodies, right? And going into last year, it was what? It was one high schooler coming in and Garriner and a bunch of portal guys, right? So there's going to be most likely more attrition in that regard. So you want to be prepared to balance that out with something you're comfortable with. And in that regard, Hank, I think, is a great get for Auburn and Hugh specifically because of that continuity. But again, size, processing, all of that is there. And the production is there too, extremely efficient at Lipscomb this year, which I think went on another state title run in the process. So,
man, how about Dilfer saying that UAB was going to out-recruit Auburn? Did you see all that stuff?
Hey, ambition is a part of the game, right? I think,
Unbelievable.
No disrespect to Trent, when you're outside of the state of Alabama bubble and then you jump into it, it's a bit of a whirlwind, but you got to be ambitious there in the meantime. Look, UAB will be more attractive maybe than it has been, especially offensively. But yeah, I think I'd probably put a little bit more stock in the Tigers and their recruiting ceiling at this point. I think that's safe.
Yeah, I think so. Hugh Freeze was there for like 3 weeks and got him in like the top 20. It's like, I don't know about that, Trent. I don't know about that. John, I want to pick your brain more about the offensive line situation in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, you got to try a Built Bar. They've got all kinds of different flavors. All the flavors are covered 100% in chocolate. They are delicious, but all of them low in calories. Most of the bars have 130 calories and just like 4 grams of sugar with 17 to 19 grams of protein. Packs a punch, gives you that natural solid fuel that your body craves and needs to get you through the day. I'm not sure how they do it, but they taste like a candy bar. And then you look at the label and it's actually ingredients that you can pronounce and it's good for you. It's awesome. You can get it at your local Walmart or at Sam's Club. You can head to your nearest store today and pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. So be sure to check out our friends at Built Bar whenever you're out and about. John Garcia, recruiting expert himself, joining us. You mentioned Tyler Johnson being a potential guy that's a starter, and there's like a bunch of offensive tackles and offensive guard transfers on campus this week. Some are leaving yesterday as this goes out, and then some are coming in today and will be here tomorrow, which is great because they'll be here for the, I believe they'll be able to be here for the Auburn-Arkansas basketball game, I hope, because that'd be awesome. That would be very, very beneficial. But assuming you don't get any more, which is ridiculous because I feel like Auburn's going to get 3 or 4 more guys. If Tyler Johnson's the guy, and I'm glad you said him because I've said his name before too, and a lot of people asked, like, what about Braden Joyner? Like, is he ready? And so could Tyler Johnson like be ready as a guard, you think? Or is this the type of thing where Hugh Freeze and the staff are like, no, we're going to get like 4 transfers and start all of them on the offensive line with Jeremiah Wright?
Yeah, I think that remains to be seen, but it probably is the most likely scenario. Again, you're talking about a transition to the SEC West where you've got to try to hit the ground running as much as possible. And in this day and age, utilizing the portal is your quickest path to that. There are countless examples this year, including a team that's going to play for a national title here in a couple of days. But among the freshmen, I think Johnson has the best movement skills, the greatest length to his frame. So I think that probably propels him above the rest initially. But from an interior perspective, I mean, look, with Braden Joyner and Clay Wedden, you know what you're getting with those guys. They're 300-pounders that are maulers that want to play inside and downhill. Now, if Joyner can snap the football a little bit more and really assimilate towards that center spot, I do think that's a unique path for him, and it's just not a lot of guys who have that experience.
Over Lou?
Yeah, I think that could
Lou?
be a move for him. Lou is a guy who's played on the inside plenty as well. I think Lou almost moves too well to stick at center. Joyner is a little bit more compact, a little bit more leverage based in that regard. Maybe you just put them against each other and see where the chips fall. But I do think Lou has a lot more upside than Joyner, whose floor might be a little bit higher. So I think Joyner and Wedden, you're ready right now. You're closer to being finished products. I think Lou and Johnson in particular still have a lot of work and room to improve to where their best ball is well ahead of them. And then the JUCO kid, Miller, wild card, right? I mean, that's always a bit of a wild card there. Obviously older, a little bit more experienced, conventionally has played the offensive tackle position and has that familiarity with Coach Thornton, who recruited him to Ole Miss before that flip. So I think that will be interesting relative to these transfer players. But among the high schoolers, yeah, I think Joyner and Whedon are ready to play right now as opposed to Johnson and Lou, where I think you're going to need a little bit more time for each of them. But movement skill-wise, yeah, I'm going Tyler Johnson above the rest.
Yeah, with all of the tackles that Auburn's kind of trending for in the portal, the Western Kentucky kid seems to be, and he may be committed by the time this goes up, John. I mean, it seems like it's that close.
Right.
With Gunnar Britton is his name. But if they get a guy like him, they went out and got Dylan Wade in the portal.
Mm-hmm.
Is Xavier Miller, because we kind of penciled Wade and Miller as the starting tackles, but if you get this Gunnar Britton guy could play. So do they try then to move him to guard, or does Wade move to guard? You've talked to Miller some. Did guard ever come up when you spoke to him, or does he want to be a tackle?
He's more comfortable run blocking. So, I mean, that is something that would make a lot of sense. He's well over 300 pounds. So from a size perspective, that would make some sense, especially compared to Wade, who I think is a little bit leaner, just built for the tackle spot, right? So I don't think you're going to move him to the inside. So I think Miller could potentially do that in a pinch. Less experience as a pass blocker anyway, especially relative to, the kid from Western Kentucky, which, again, you talk about a passing first offense. That thing has been humming for years under several different coaches and coordinators. So I think you feel much more comfortable if he jumps in the boat with him at one of the tackle spots. So, yeah, I think Miller would be the first candidate to move inside. He's the biggest. He's the heaviest. He already plays with great leverage on top of that, too. So I think that would probably be a de facto move in his regard. I know at Ole Miss, they were talking about some guard stuff with him initially. Don't know if that contributed to the flip, but obviously, again, same future position coach in Coach Thornton. So I do think that has probably been communicated at this point. He'd be the first candidate to move inside among the three.
John Garcia, thank you so much for your time. As always, how can people give you some love, brother?
Yeah, let's talk ball at every level. John Garcia _JR on Twitter. And, of course, with the rest of your folks here at the Locked On Network, we're talking ball all the time. So come join.
Absolutely. You can find all my written work at auburndaily.com, and we'll be back soon. This has been Locked On Auburn.